The little girl was thrown out of the house by her stepmother in the middle of a rainy night, accidentally stepped into a millionaire's car. And what happened next changed her life forever. "I'm holding your hand for the last time. Why is it so cold, Mummy?" Lena Rosewood, 8 years old, was a small, quiet girl, her dark brown eyes always carrying a calm, distant look far beyond her age. She didn't talk much. She didn't cause trouble. Her teacher once said, "It's like she's living somewhere farther away than this classroom." But in truth, Lena lived only in her mother's world. Evelyn, her mother, was a part-time clerk at City Hall, gentle, reserved, and always faintly scented with chamomile tea on her wrists. She raised her daughter with meticulous care, every pair of socks carefully mended, every loaf of bread sliced into perfect squares. But lately, the edges of those slices were often burnt, and her hands trembled when she buttoned up Lena's shirt. The hospital found no specific diagnosis. They just said nervous exhaustion and chronic fatigue. Evelyn kept trying until she couldn't anymore. The day Evelyn passed away, the rain was icy cold. The funeral was simple, held in a small church. Lena stood among the cold wooden pews, wearing the unfinished sweater her mother had been knitting. The adults around her held umbrellas, but no one held one for her. Because no one thought to. Or perhaps no one cared enough anymore. The wool scarf her mother had knitted for her the previous winter was still wrapped around her neck. She took it off, wanting to place it on the coffin lid. But she pulled her hand back. She couldn't let go. A hand touched her shoulder. Light and cold. It was her father, Arthur. But he didn't look at her. His eyes flicked past the coffin, staring off into the distance, as if Evelyn had never existed in his memory. Lena turned, trying to hug him, but he pulled his hand away. One small step, and just enough distance for her to understand. To him, she had become something that shouldn't exist. The coffin was lowered into the ground. The rain began to fall harder. Strange hands patted her shoulders. A few fingers brushed her hair. Empty condolences repeated like a grinding mill. "It's okay, sweetheart. Your mom's at peace now. Everything will be all right." No one truly believed the words they said. Lena stood still. Her soaked shoes clung to the earth. Her mourning clothes clung to her small body. She didn't wipe her tears, maybe because they had mixed with the rain, and by now, no one could tell pain from weather anymore. Margaret Holloway, the woman who had just married Arthur, Lena's father, had once been a shadowy presence in his life for years. She arrived in town claiming to help care for Evelyn during her illness, but everyone could see the critical gaze, the controlling tone she used whenever Lena was near. A face without expression, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Beneath those lenses, not a single tear was shed. 3 days later, brief laughter echoed in the house. Arthur and Margaret stood side by side in the living room. A minister was conducting a small, quiet wedding ceremony, just enough to legitimize a relationship that was never new. No flowers, no wedding rings, but also no lingering tears of the past. Lena stood on the staircase, hand gripping the railing, watching like a stranger. After the ceremony, Margaret went straight into Evelyn's old bedroom. She opened the wardrobe and pulled out a knitting basket still tangled with unfinished threads. Inside was a dark blue scarf, not yet complete, each stitch knitted through sleepless nights when Evelyn coughed, but kept knitting for her daughter. The scarf still carried the faint scent of peppermint oil. Margaret picked it up and twisted it gently. "There's no reason to keep these things anymore," she said, loud enough for Arthur to hear, though her eyes never left the yarn. Lena stepped down from the stairs, about to enter, but stopped at the doorway. Margaret tossed the scarf into the fireplace. A soft pop was heard as flame met fiber. Lena gasped, but didn't scream. She stood still, her fists clenched tightly. The flickering firelight danced in her reddened eyes. Arthur said nothing. The fire wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to burn away a piece of memory, quietly, completely, and indifferently. The next morning, Margaret called her into the living room. "Where's your suitcase?" she asked. My mother's suitcase," Lena murmured. "Number. From now on, it's yours, and you'll need it. Today." She didn't shout. She wasn't angry. She spoke in a flat, even tone, as if discussing the disposal of an unwanted object in the house. Arthur sat beside her, gripping a coffee cup he didn't drink from. When Lena turned to him, he lowered his head. "Go, before it rains." Lena didn't understand how adults could give up so easily, as if one signature could erase all memories, as if the woman who had just been buried was merely a chapter turned over. But she understood one thing. Her mother was no longer here, and no one was going to stop her from leaving. She dragged the suitcase across the hallway. The house, once small, now suddenly felt vast and frighteningly empty. She paused at the doorway, the same one where her mother used to wait for her after school every afternoon. The doorknob was cold. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up. She stepped across the threshold, never looking back. The door slammed shut behind her, not by the wind, but by the very man she once called Dad. The village road leading to the highway was covered in cold mist, and puddles reflected the faint yellow light from scattered street lamps. Lena dragged an old suitcase, its wheels clattering against the wet ground, each step weighed down by soft mud. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't go back. The door behind her had slammed shut, closed by the man who once was her father. The first house Lena knocked on belonged to Mrs. Doris, the closest neighbor. She was the woman who used to bring apple pie to Lena's mother every Thanksgiving. But when the knocking echoed through the rainy night, Mrs. Doris only parted the curtain slightly, looked for a moment, then turned off the lights. Not a word, not a move. The second house had a wind chime made of seashells hanging from the eaves, and its door was painted blue. Lena remembered the woman in that house had once given her a hair clip flower on her mother's birthday. She knocked 3 times, then 4. Only the sound of a dog barking came from inside. No one came out. The door stayed shut. The third house had a handmade wooden number plaque. Lena remembered she had once drawn a picture and given it to their daughter. She knocked one last time. This time, a light flicked on in the window. A man's voice called out, dry and cold. "Who is it?" In the middle of the night, Lena managed to say, "It's Lena. I just need a place to sleep for one night." There was a silence. Then the window shut. The light turned off. She stood there for a few seconds, then turned away, pulling her suitcase through the rain. Her eyes didn't blink. Her lips were pressed tight. Under the shadow of an oak tree, a stray dog lay curled up, one leg tucked in, caked in mud. It whimpered as Lena approached, its eyes barely open, wet and cautious. She sat down, fumbled in her coat pocket, and pulled out a piece of stale bread, what remained from breakfast on the morning of the funeral. She broke the bread in half and held one piece out to the dog. "I don't have much either, but we can share, okay?" The creature sniffed, then began to eat slowly. No growls, no barks. 2 small beings huddled under an old tree, sharing the last bite of the day. It was then that headlights swept through the rain like a blade of light. A car approached, quietly, slowly. It stopped a few meters away. Then the headlights dimmed. Elliot Warren was behind the wheel. A man once hailed as a symbol of success in the East Coast financial world. A self-made millionaire who built his empire with his hands and eyes that missed nothing on a balance sheet. But that was 10 years ago. After the car accident that took his wife and 6-year-old daughter, Elliot had all but vanished from the public eye. He sold all his shares, withdrew from every board, and left the city. Rumors said he lived reclusively in a house on the outskirts of a small town, only occasionally seen visiting a hillside cemetery, where 2 white stone markers stood side by side, engraved with the names of his loved ones. And the rumors were true. Tonight, he was returning from one such visit on their wedding anniversary. No flowers, no ceremony, just a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and a silence so deep it echoed. When the headlights swept over the small figure in the rain, he didn't stop right away. He could have hit the gas and passed like everyone else. But it was the eyes, their absence of pleading, of fear, that made him grip the steering wheel tighter. It was the look he had seen in the mirror after the funeral. Eyes that said what no words could, a complete shattering from within. He rolled down the window. "What are you doing out here this late at night?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She stood, brushed the mud off her sleeve, her eyes not looking directly at him, but steady. "I got kicked out of my house." Her voice was hoarse, not from crying, from being silent for too long. "What's your name?" "Lena. But no one needs to know my name anymore." Elliot tightened his grip on the wheel. That sentence wasn't an accusation, not a complaint, not a plea for pity. It was just a conclusion, and that was what made it terrifying. He opened the car door, unhurried. "Get in. It's still raining." Lena didn't move right away. She studied him, carefully, like an old person sizing up a stranger. Then she nodded slightly and stepped into the passenger seat, still clutching her suitcase. Elliot closed the door. The interior light softened. No one spoke. Only the rain continued tapping against the windows. As the car started rolling, he said, "Leaving you out here would be a crime." Inside the car, there was the scent of leather and a faint hint of mint. Lena sat upright, her feet not touching the floor. Her eyes remained fixed on the outside. "Have you eaten anything?" he asked, eyes still on the road. Number I didn't dare ask. He nodded slightly. The car stopped in front of a small convenience store, its lights still on. "Sit tight." A few minutes later, he returned with a paper bag. Pastries, warm tea, napkins. Butter cakes, not too sweet. My daughter liked these. Lena accepted them without a word. She took small bites, slowly. When she finished, her gaze was calmer, though not as sharp as it had been under the rain. The car turned onto a narrow road, lined with tall poplar trees on both sides. At the end stood a black-tiled house, warm yellow light glowing through the curtains. "You can stay here tonight. Just tonight, if that's what you want. No one will force you." Lena stepped out. Before walking onto the porch, she turned back. "What's your name?" "Elliot Warren." Thank you. No need. But if anyone asks, tell them you were taken in by a man who once lost everything, because he knows leaving you out there would have been a crime." The night sky remained thick with grey clouds as Elliot's car turned into the driveway leading to the Warren estate. The iron gate opened automatically, releasing a deep mechanical hum like the long, weary sigh of forgotten steel. The house emerged from behind the trees, black-tiled roof, grey stone walls, brown wooden windows covered with sheer curtains, every detail meticulously maintained, yet it radiated the feeling of a place no one truly lived in. Inside, the space was vast, but not cold. Warm yellow light from low-hanging lamps cast soft shadows across the walls. An antique clock ticked gently, steadily. No television, no music. only the sound of silence. Lena stepped over the threshold, keeping her suitcase close. She didn't ask anything, didn't look around. The house didn't scare her, but it didn't make her feel any safer either. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, silver hair neatly tied in a bun, a cream turtleneck sweater, eyes slightly narrowed, but not scrutinizing. She looked at Lena for a moment, then gave Elliot a small nod without saying a word. "This is my mother, Mrs. Emily," Elliot said, his voice softer. She walked forward, unhurried. Standing in front of Lena, she didn't ask her name, nor why she was here. She simply gave a slight bow and said in a deep, smooth voice, "You must be cold. I'll prepare a towel and clean sleepwear for you." Lena nodded, almost instinctively. She followed her upstairs, down a long hallway lined with evenly spaced old paintings. Her room was on the second floor, with a window facing the back garden. The sheets were clean, carrying a faint scent of lavender. On the desk stood a vintage-style bedside lamp, glowing dimly. Mrs. Emily didn't say much. She placed a warm towel on the bed, then quietly stepped out. No questions, no fuss. Lena changed clothes. Her hands brushed every corner of the blanket, as if checking whether the place was real. She crawled under the covers, lay on her side, eyes open, ears tuned to the wind howling outside. Guarding herself against the strange quiet inside the house, she placed her suitcase right next to the bed, slightly unzipped, so she could always reach it with one hand. Beneath her pillow, she hid a spoon, not for any particular use, but because back in the old house her mother once told her, "If you hold on to something metal, it helps you feel like you're still in control." In the days that followed, Mrs. Emily still didn't ask anything. She simply scooped just enough rice into Lena's bowl, always leaving a small piece of cake next to it. When Lena ate, she didn't look at her, just knitted or watered the plants indoors. Each morning, Lena's washcloth was neatly folded and placed on the chair by the bed, and every night, the hallway light was already turned on. Lena said nothing. She didn't smile either. She ate slowly, secretly wrapping part of the cake in a handkerchief and hiding it under her pillow. Not because she was hungry, but because she wasn't sure if there would still be food tomorrow. One morning, upon waking up, she found the handkerchief under her pillow had been taken. In its place was a new slice of cake, carefully wrapped in parchment paper. No one said anything, but it spoke volumes. One time, as Mrs. Emily helped untangle her wet hair after a bath, Lena suddenly asked, "Have you ever forgotten what your loved ones' faces look like?" Mrs. Emily paused briefly, then continued brushing. "Yes. But don't worry. The things we love are still there. They're just hiding for a while." Lena nodded. That night, she sat on her bed for a long time, then whispered softly to herself, "My mum used to sit for hours after drinking tea." She didn't say anything, just breathed heavily. I thought she was tired, but in the last few months, it happened every time after tea. That sentence slipped through the slightly ajar door, and Elliot, standing outside, heard it. He stood in the dark hallway, back against the cold wall, eyes closed. Lena's words echoed in his mind. "My mum used to sit for hours after drinking tea." She didn't say anything, just breathed heavily. A small detail, seemingly meaningless, but it made Elliot stop cold. He didn't know who Evelyn was. He had never met Lena before. But her words stirred something unsettling, a kind of unnatural, repetitive fatigue, overlooked and forgotten. After Lena had fallen asleep, Elliot returned to his study. He opened his notebook, jotted down her words, then searched the old drawer for a file he had once compiled about symptoms and toxins related to slow poisoning, something he had delved into deeply after the sudden deaths of his wife and child. That old obsession, like a scar, never truly healed. By chance, he flipped to a page bearing a warning: reactions after consuming tea or food containing thallium, fatigue, shortness of breath, prolonged weakness. Elliot stopped. Lena's offhand remark, like a wisp of smoke, now clung to him tightly. He stood up, intending to return to his room, when he noticed Lena's small suitcase placed in the corner of the hallway. It wasn't locked. He hesitated, then opened it slightly, not out of curiosity, but out of a concern for the child that ran deeper than he'd realized. Inside a soft-covered notebook, pressed between its pages, were a few scribbled notes, perhaps Lena's diary. The first page had only one line: "If I'm no longer here, Mom will always know I miss her very much." A few short entries that followed made him stop cold. "Mom drank Aunt Margaret's black tea. She said it tasted strange today. She told me not to say anything to anyone. One time, Mum threw up after drinking it. Aunt said it was because Mum was weak, but she wasn't like that before." Elliot's chest tightened. Part of him wanted to close the notebook, but another part compelled him to keep reading. That afternoon, he sat with Lena in the library, a small room bathed in gentle sunlight. She sat by the bookshelf, holding a comic book, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward him. "Did you write those notes?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena nodded. "My mum used to tell me to write down anything strange, so I wouldn't forget later." "Who is Aunt Margaret?" he asked, the first time he had spoken aloud the name of that mysterious woman. Lena hesitated, then spoke as if recounting a story from a book. "She's my dad's new wife. She used to come over a lot. Then, when Mum got sick, she started living with us. She doesn't like me." Elliot tilted his head slightly but didn't interrupt. She continued, "She always said I was messy. She told Mum she was sick because she wouldn't take her medicine, but I thought Mum was fine until she started drinking Aunt's tea. Mum used to laugh a lot." "And your dad?" he asked. He didn't say anything. At first he still hugged me, but later he started turning his face away. Elliot didn't reply, but inside him the pieces were starting to come together. It wasn't a coincidence that Evelyn got sick right when Margaret appeared. And it certainly wasn't a coincidence that an 8-year-old remembered every detail of her mother's reactions, each one seemingly small, yet gradually pointing to something far greater. A gut feeling had now become a clear direction. The sky that day was crystal clear, as if it had never known the quiet rains of the night before. A light breeze passed through the maple trees, their leaves now a deep golden hue. In that seemingly peaceful setting, Elliot sat on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the backyard where Lena was rearranging small pebbles into neat rows. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice as gentle as the wind. "At my old school, Miss Rachel used to teach us to line up pebbles to count the days," Lena replied without looking up. "She said each stone is something you don't want to forget." Elliot came to sit beside her. "Who's Miss Rachel?" "My old teacher. She used to get scolded by that mean lady a lot, but she'd sneak me lunch anyway. One day she told me, 'When you're tired, just sit still. I'll notice.'" A pause. "She got fired." The mean lady said she lied. Elliot sat in silence, eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you remember her full name?" "Rachel Ford. I heard Dad say it once when he signed some paper." It was the first time Lena had ever mentioned a specific name. Elliot carefully jotted it down in his notebook. After tucking Lena in for a nap, he returned to his study and looked up Rachel Ford in the local education records. Just a few calls later, he found she had been a primary school teacher at Chestnut Lane Elementary, resigned 4 months prior for violating conduct policy. One detail jumped out at Elliot. The complaint that accompanied her termination came from a parent named Margaret Holloway, citing that Miss Ford was planting negative thoughts in her students. A heaviness settled in Elliot's chest. He didn't know exactly what had happened in that classroom, but if there was anyone who had believed Lena, perhaps it was this woman. The next day, he drove to the neighboring town, following the last known address listed in the old school's personnel files. "Hannah, I need to access the medical records of a woman named Evelyn Rosewood, Woodvale Town Hospital, within the year before she passed." Hannah hesitated. "What exactly are you looking for?" "I'm not certain yet, but something feels wrong. And if I'm right, then a child survived not by luck, but by instinct." That afternoon, Elliot drove to Woodvale. The elementary school was old, a layer of dust clinging to the sign, Woodvale Public School. He asked around until he found Rachel Ford's new address. She opened the door, hesitant. "I'm sorry, I'm not receiving visitors." "I'm Elliot Warren. I'm caring for a little girl named Lena. You used to teach her." She didn't answer right away, but her expression shifted. "Is she okay?" "She speaks very little, but she did mention you." Rachel invited him into the small apartment. She brewed 2 cups of tea, then sat in silence for a while. "Evelyn was a good mother," she said quietly. "But near the end, she declined so fast. Every time she came to pick up Lena, she was out of breath. I asked, and she said it was just from working too hard." Elliot nodded, listening carefully. "Margaret, the woman Arthur married right after. She always meddled in school affairs. Once, she came to the principal and said I was too emotional. And then you got fired. Not officially, but I was told to take a leave. No one stood up for me." She stood up, opened a desk drawer, and took out an old notebook. Placing it on the table, she said, "Evelyn once left this in Lena's backpack. I kept it. Some pages were torn out. I think she suspected something." Elliot flipped through it. The handwriting was soft, careful. The first line read, "Day 15. After afternoon tea, I felt a headache and slight nausea. Didn't tell Arthur." Another page, "Margaret brought the tea. Sweeter than usual. Something's not right." That night, as Elliot returned home, he caught a glimpse of a small figure standing just beyond the front fence. The boy hesitated for a long moment before turning away. It was Jonas, the neighbor kid who used to play with Lena. Elliot only caught a glance of the small cloth-wrapped bundle in his hands and the mixture of joy and shyness in his eyes as they met. The next morning, after school, Jonas came back. This time, he gently knocked on the back door and asked the housekeeper to call for Lena. When she stepped out, she froze briefly. I saw you yesterday while passing by, but I didn't dare come in," Jonas said quietly, offering a sandwich wrapped in a cloth. "Peanut butter sandwich, like the one on your birthday. I thought maybe you'd remember." Lena gave a small nod. Her hands took the sandwich, clutching it tight. Jonas glanced around, then pulled Lena closer to the fence. "I have to tell you something. Aunt Margaret once threw something into the well behind the house. I'm not sure what it was, but it had a frame, like a photo. I think it was a picture of your mum." Lena stayed silent. A gentle breeze passed, lifting strands of her hair. Then she turned to Jonas, her voice soft and hoarse. "That might be the only photo I have left of my mom. I want to find it, but I don't know how." That afternoon, Lena hesitantly stepped into the small library where Elliot was reading. She stood at the doorway, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. "Can I ask you a favor?" she said, not meeting his eyes. Elliot set down the book and nodded. Can you help me find something in the well behind my old house? Jonas, said Aunt Margaret threw something down there. I think it might be a photo of my mum. It was the first time Lena had ever asked for help. Elliot looked at her for a long moment, then stood up and gently said, You don't have to do this alone anymore, Lena. Let me take care of it. The next morning, Elliot hired a forensic team to investigate the land behind Lena's old house. From the bottom of the well, they retrieved a water-damaged photo and a shattered glass jar, its interior stained with remnants of a corroding chemical. No one said a word, but Elliot knew this was no longer a feeling. It was a sign. The investigation was no longer just a duty. It was a truth that had to be uncovered. Do you believe that sometimes even a blurred photograph can shed light on a buried truth? If yes, comment yes. If not, comment no, and share your reason. I'd truly love to hear your story. At the center of the photo, a woman is seated beside a wooden table, her hair neatly tied back, one hand resting on a white porcelain teacup. Slanted light from a window behind her creates a soft, blurred glow on her shoulder. At the bottom of the box, a shattered glass jar, the residue inside forming dark streaks that seep into the metal lining, leaving behind a faint chemical scent lingering in the air. That detail made him pause. Lena said it was the same tea set Margaret used every morning. But the strange part was in the bottom corner of the photo, a barely legible handwritten note. Elliot tilted the photo under the light, making out just a fragment. Must not let her. Lena. He took a breath. Not everyone writes on photos unless they're trying to hide something or leave a message. Margaret throwing it into the well might not have been a moment of impulsive emotion. It could have been an attempt to erase something, a trace, evidence that she had been present when Evelyn started to weaken, despite later insisting she had no involvement during that time. That morning, Elliot sat down with his small notebook, combing through each note. In one from a conversation with Rachel Ford a few days earlier, he came across the line. Evelyn once took Lena to the Elroy Clinic. Seemed like to check some red rashes behind her neck. The name made him stop. Elroy. He opened his laptop, looked it up, and confirmed, Doctor. Elroy had worked at a private clinic near the town centre, retired 3 years ago. Without hesitation, he drove to the address listed in the old records. The small clinic sat tucked behind 2 rows of brown brick houses, the wooden sign hanging slightly askew, Elroy and Associates, Community Healthcare, since 1974. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was still in place, as if the owner had only just stepped out. Dr. Elroy, silver-haired, narrow-shouldered, but with sharp eyes, greeted him with a mix of surprise and guardedness. I remember Evelyn well, Elroy said slowly. She used to come in whenever she felt tired, had headaches, trouble concentrating. It looked like some kind of mild nervous breakdown, but there was never a clear diagnosis. Elliot asked, Did she ever have a full medical workup? Elroy nodded. I haven't looked at it in years, but if you'd like, I can get the records from the hospital. And there's something else. Elroy furrowed his brow. I kept a sample of Evelyn's hair from a scalp biopsy back when we suspected some sort of topical poisoning. It might still be in cold storage. That afternoon, the sample was sent for analysis. 2 days later, the results came in. Traces of thallium were found in the hair. Breaking news. Suspicion now had a backbone. Elliot went to see Sheriff Collins. Sheriff Collins had been the town's chief of police for over 20 years. Known for being tough and tight-lipped, he had earned the trust of many locals by keeping the town peaceful. But in recent years, Rumors had spread that he was influenced by powerful connections, particularly with the Holloway family. "I know this case is sensitive," Elliot said. "But this is no longer suspicion. This is evidence." Collins crossed his arms coldly. "I need more than a hair sample. Who are you accusing? Margaret Holloway? Got witnesses, corroborations, timestamps?" Elliot raised his voice. "Are you saying a child's word only matters if there's someone else to confirm it?" The conversation grew tense. In the end, Sheriff Collins relented. "I'll review the old files, but if you want to take this further, you'll need more than just gut instinct." That same day, Elliot stopped by May Thompson's grocery store. He wasn't there by chance. During a casual breakfast chat with Lena, she had said, "One time I was standing outside in the cold, shaking, and Mrs. May from the store nearby gave me a big warm scarf." Elliot had remembered that small detail. Now, he stepped into the old wooden shop, where a hand-painted sign read, "Thompson's Store, since 1956. May. Thompson, a stout woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, stood behind the counter, surprised to see him. The little girl used to stand on the porch, shivering, too scared to come in. One time, I had to give her a scarf to wrap around herself before she could even walk. Would you be willing to confirm that? I'm not afraid of Margaret, Mr. Warren." That evening, when Elliot returned home, he looked at Lena as she slept. She lay on her side, still holding the blurred photo close. To him, every clue was a line, and every line was a map. He was getting closer to the heart of the truth, a truth that had been buried by many adults in a small town. Elliot was sitting in his study when the phone rang. It was Ms. Lilly, the elderly seamstress who used to alter Evelyn's dresses and occasionally helped Lena when she was still living in town. She lived alone behind the old tailor shop, rarely spoke, but always observed quietly. Earlier, she had accidentally overheard a conversation between Rachel Ford and Attorney Cruz at the pharmacy, where Rachel mentioned her suspicions surrounding Evelyn's death and Lena's unstable life. Ms. Lilly called Elliot, her voice low and trembling. "I found something strange. You might want to take a look." When he arrived, Ms. Lilly handed him a small wooden box. Inside was one of Evelyn's old coats, the kind she used to wear when taking Lena to school on cold days. In the lining, she had discovered a small worn leather notebook. Inside, in Evelyn's slanted handwriting, was a list of symptoms: fatigue, shortness of breath, dizziness after drinking tea. On the last page was a hastily written line, as if written in a rush. "If anything happens to me, don't let Margaret near Lena." Inside, in Evelyn's slanted handwriting, was a list of symptoms and one urgent line. "If anything happens to me, don't let Margaret near Lena." Elliot immediately brought the evidence to Sheriff Collins. Collins read it silently, then sat in contemplation. But he still needed concrete proof of access to poison. Together with Attorney Cruz, they traced back the chemical supply chains around the town. 3 days later, Mr. Darrell Hayes, a small-town chemical store owner in a neighboring town, was invited to the sheriff's office. There, he provided an old purchase order from 5 years ago. The buyer's name was listed as Mary Hollow, but the person who picked it up, captured in a photo, was unmistakably Arthur Rosewood. The chemical sold was thallium, in a small quantity, typically used only in scientific research. "I didn't think anything of it at the time," Mr. Hayes said. "But when the officer showed me the photo, I recognized him immediately. He's the one who came to pick it up." With this evidence, Sheriff Collins signed the arrest warrant. The next morning, Elliot sat with Lena on the porch steps. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the morning wind was crisp and cold. "Lena," he said slowly, "you don't have to testify. No one's forcing you. But if you don't speak up, No one may ever know how Evelyn really died. Lena folded the handkerchief in her hands. I don't want to hurt my father, even if he doesn't look at me anymore. Elliot pulled out a copy of Evelyn's hair toxicology report and placed it on the table. Your mother didn't die from illness. She was poisoned, and the person who picked up that poison was your father. Lena froze. Her whole body stiffened. Dad knew too? At the very least, he held the poison in his hands. Lena clenched her small fists tightly. Then, I'll go. The sky had not yet fully brightened when 3 police cars pulled up in front of the ash-grey house on the outskirts of town. Sheriff Collins stepped out first, his long coat fluttering in the wind. He gave a silent signal for 2 officers to circle around to the back door, while he and Officer Jenkins knocked on the old wooden front door. No answer. Police, open up. Collins gave a nod. One strong shove blew the hinges off. The door flew open. Inside, the house was eerily silent. On the table, a cup of coffee was still steaming. A plate of bread had only a single bite taken out. The strong scent of perfume still lingered on the pillow. Damn it, Collins hissed. They just left. From the back window, a young officer shouted, Tire tracks are fresh, can't be more than 10 minutes old. Collins stepped onto the porch and pulled out his phone. I'm issuing a statewide BOLO, 2 individuals, Margaret Holloway and Arthur Rosewood, suspected of fatal poisoning and child abuse, considered armed and dangerous. By mid-morning, checkpoints were set up. A tracking team was called in from the neighboring state. The small town stirred like it had been struck by an invisible storm. From an old gas station near the woods, the investigation team pulled a blurry video, a grey sedan leaving the area at 5:12 a.m. The driver wore a cap, but the facial structure and build matched Arthur Rosewood. They had a lead. At the Warren house, Elliot sat in his study, phone in hand, listening to the internal report from the sheriff. He said nothing as he hung up. But when he walked back into the living room, where Lena was sitting, he paused for a long moment before speaking. The police reached the house, but they escaped. Lena didn't turn around. She just gave a small nod and quietly hugged the old teddy bear Jonas had given her the day before. Her eyes stared toward the door, as if waiting for something, or afraid something might return. Elliot sat down beside her. No one can hurt you here, but we need to end this, together. She turned to him, for the first time in days, and spoke softly. You're not going to leave, right? Number not, while there's still truth that hasn't been told. 3 days later, early morning, when the sunlight had just begun to touch the treetops at the forest's edge, Sheriff Collins received a call from the Federal Investigation Unit. We've located the vehicle's signal. They're on Timberline Trail, less than 40 miles from the border. Immediately, a task force was dispatched. Deep in the old woods, they found the car abandoned by the roadside. In the forest, they discovered a hastily built campsite, a fire still faintly smoldering, and 2 people, a man and a woman, hiding near a cliff edge. Margaret said nothing when she was arrested. Arthur broke down in tears. Collins said not a word. He simply presented the warrant and handcuffed them one by one. Justice, he said quietly, may arrive late, but it always arrives. The county courthouse sat nestled in the center square of the small town. It was a cold morning, the sky blanketed in grey clouds, wind whistling through the old brick crevices of the building. People gathered, filling the steps, silently waiting. No one spoke loudly. News of the case involving Margaret Holloway and Arthur Rosewood had spread across the region like a slow-burning fire. The more it was hidden, the faster it spread. Elliot Warren entered the courthouse with a measured pace. He wore a grey suit, a plain dark blue tie, his expression unreadable. His hand rested gently on Lena's shoulder. The girl walked close beside him, in a navy blue sweater that Mrs. Emily had laid out for her the night before. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. Mrs. Emily, Jonas and his parents, Ms. Rachel Ford, Mrs. May Thompson, Dr. Elroy, even Lily the seamstress, each person scattered in their own place. But when you looked around, everyone's gaze was drawn to the same point. Lena. Across the aisle, Margaret Holloway appeared neat and composed, her hair pinned high, her eyeliner sharp. She did not bow her head, nor did she show any sign of distress. Arthur Rosewood, in contrast, was hunched over, eyes red, shuffling behind like a shadow. Judge Paul Whitmore entered, a man near retirement, known for his stern demeanor. Court is now in session. Prosecutor Hannah Cruz, representing the plaintiff, opened firmly. This is not merely a case of child abuse. This is a conspiracy to eliminate a mother in order to seize her assets and abandon a child. The defense attorney for Margaret and Arthur, a man named Glenn Rourke, countered, "My clients deny all charges. There is no direct evidence showing Margaret or Arthur committed the poisoning. What the prosecution presents is all circumstantial and emotional." The first piece of evidence presented was a sample of Evelyn's hair. Though elderly, Dr. Elroy stood firm as he read the lab report. Traces of thallium, a heavy metal poison, were found accumulated in Evelyn's hair follicles. The dosage increased gradually over the 6 months leading up to her death. Rourke argued back, thallium could come from the environment, from pesticides. You cannot conclude this was intentional poisoning. Next was an invoice from Mr. Hayes, the chemical shop owner. The order was under the name Mary Hollow, a known alias of Margaret. The person who picked it up was Arthur Rosewood. I identified him from a photo confirmation. Rourke said, "Mr. Arthur received the package, but he didn't know what it was. He was following his wife's instructions, without question." Mrs. May Thompson was called to the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted, "There was a time I saw little Lena standing out in the rain, without a coat. I gave her a scarf. She was shaking like a leaf. Did you report this to the authorities?" I thought someone else would. I'm sorry." Jonas stepped up, clutching his cap. "Mrs. Margaret once told me if I kept playing with Lena, she'd get my dad fired. Did you tell anyone?" I was scared. But Lena, she always said it was okay. Then came the moment when Attorney Hannah presented Evelyn's diary, found hidden in the lining of her coat. A long silence followed as the judge read aloud. "Every evening after tea, I get a headache. I suspect Margaret. But Arthur doesn't believe me. I fear for Lena." Ms. Rachel Ford recalled, "I once reported signs of abuse to the principal. I was forced to take leave. They said I was making a fuss. After that, I never saw Lena at school again." Sheriff Collins took the stand. "I take full responsibility for not acting sooner. I was influenced by Margaret, by her social standing and the rumors. But the truth is, I was wrong." When it was Lena's turn, all eyes turned to her. She stepped up to the witness stand, small against the vast room. She looked at no one. She simply said, "My mum used to say, there will come a time when you have to speak for yourself. I never thought I'd have to do that. In court." She paused, swallowing hard. "I used to wish my dad would look at me the way he used to. Just once, but ever since Mum died, Dad hasn't been Dad anymore. Aunt Margaret didn't like me. She said I was a burden. Dad didn't object. When Mum got sick, Aunt made tea every night. After drinking it, Mum would feel weak, short of breath. Aunt said she was just frail. But she never was before that." Her voice dropped. "Mum told me, if anything happened, to hold on to the photo, but Aunt threw it down the well." Arthur lifted his head. For the first time, he didn't avoid her gaze. a gaze filled with suspicion, hurt, and a suffocated hope. The room was silent as he choked out, "I'm sorry." He broke down in tears. Real tears, not from fear, but from guilt. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking violently. "I didn't have the courage. I abandoned you, abandoned Evelyn. I was weak and cowardly. I let her destroy everything good." Margaret sat across from him, face unmoved. Even as her husband wept, she showed no reaction. Her eyes remained fixed forward, not blinking once. The judge was silent for a long time. Then he summoned both attorneys to the bench. After 15 minutes, he returned to his seat. Based on the physical evidence, witness testimonies, and forensic results, the court finds Margaret Holloway is sentenced to 12 years in prison for deliberate poisoning, resulting in death and systematic child abuse. Arthur Rosewood is stripped of parental rights and is mandated to undergo psychological treatment under supervision. Court is adjourned. Police cuffed Margaret and Arthur. She tried to maintain a calm expression, but her lips quivered slightly. Arthur kept his head down, saying nothing. As Lena stepped down from the stand, she turned around. She looked at her father, the man who had once been her safe place. He avoided her gaze, and this time she was the one who turned away, decisively. Elliot met her at the door, his hand on her shoulder, wordless. The crowd parted silently into two sides. Those who had once known Evelyn, who had seen Lena thin and shivering in the rain, now stood, not clapping, not cheering, because that silence was justice. At day's end, Elliot stood at the window of his office, looking out. The verdict had been read. Lives had fallen, and a child had risen, amidst what should have been too much to bear. He knew the journey wasn't over, but at the very least, they had made it past a turning point. A quiet autumn morning passed peacefully on the hilltop of the Warren residence. Weak sunlight filtered through the maple leaves, casting soft shadows across the stone-paved front yard. Golden leaves drifted gently, like whispers of time, tender, unhurried. Inside the large house, everything had returned to silence. No more ringing phones, no more hurried, anxious footsteps. Lena sat by the wooden table next to the window, her small legs swinging slightly. On the table lay a blank sheet of paper, an old box of colored pencils, and a slant of light falling through the window pane. She drew slowly, unhurriedly, her hand trembling lightly whenever she colored in a familiar detail. The picture gradually emerged. A gentle woman with shoulder-length brown hair standing next to a little girl, and beside them stood a tall man wearing a wide-brimmed hat, arms outstretched, embracing them. That was Elliot Warren. The adoption paperwork was finalized sooner than expected. Attorney Hannah Cruz, with help from many sides, had submitted all the evidence and completed the procedures within 3 weeks of the hearing. Mrs. Emily was the first to sign on Elliot's behalf. Her handwriting was soft and slightly shaky, but resolute. "She deserves a real home," she said, gently placing her hand on the file. Elliot stood beside her, saying nothing. But the way he looked at the paper, it was the gaze of a man who had already lost so much and now refused to lose anything more. That afternoon, after a simple dinner of pie and chicken soup, Lena walked over to him, holding the picture she had just finished. "I want to give this to you," she said, her voice very soft. Elliot looked at the sheet of paper. He was silent for a long while, then asked quietly, "The man in the hat, who is he?" "He's the one I hope." "I could call my dad." She didn't say it loudly. It was soft, almost a whisper. But inside Elliot's chest, it echoed like a drumbeat. He had never expected Lena to call him that. He had never been ready. "Are you sure?" he asked, unable to hide the confusion in his eyes. Lena nodded. I'm not asking you to do anything. It's just, if I call you Dad, would it make you sad? Elliot took a step back, leaning against the bookshelf behind him. A wave of emotion rose, not violent, but deep. For 10 years, he had lived like a survivor of a wreck, his body intact, but hollow inside. And now, a small soul, once abandoned, wanted to call him Dad. He didn't answer with words. He simply opened his arms. Lena stepped forward, and in that moment, in the fire-warmed room, Elliot held the little girl in his embrace. He cried, not like a man hardened by life, but like a father who had just found the child he never had. Mrs. Emily watched the scene through the slightly ajar doorway. She quietly stepped away, her eyes misty. After 10 years, her son had finally learned what it meant to forgive, not others, but himself. That night, Elliot sat alone in his study. On the desk before him was the blueprint for the founding of Lena's House of Light, a care and protection center for abused children. At the top of the page, he added a line: a place where children are believed in, are loved, and are called by their true names. The next morning, Lena walked through the garden. The breeze was cool, carrying the scent of lavender from the bushes Mrs. Emily had planted. Jonas ran up, holding 2 bagels. Want to split one? Okay, Lena smiled. Are you feeling better now? Not quite. But I think everything's beginning. Elliot stood at a distance, watching the 2 children sit beneath the tree. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, quietly. The sun had risen, just a little higher than usual, and the word Dad, newly spoken, was no longer a void. The old house sat on the southern hillside of town, once an abandoned administrative facility left untouched for decades. The plaster walls were peeling, window hinges broken, and the backyard overgrown with weeds. But in Elliot's eyes, it wasn't just a rundown building. It was the ground zero for something new. Elliot stood in the main room, hands on his hips, as sunlight filtered through the cracks in the roof, casting streaks across the cracked tile floor. Beside him, Lena clutched the perspective drawing tightly. Her eyes lit up, not because of grandeur, but because of what this place meant. I think this wall should be painted mint green, Lena said. It's a calming color for kids who are scared of the dark. Elliot nodded. You choose. This will be their home. Construction began. Mrs. Emily took charge of logistics, and Jonas did a bit of everything, proudly calling himself the assistant construction supervisor. But it was Lena who shaped the soul of the house. She picked out storybooks, suggested that each room have something unique. One had watercolor paintings, another had paper leaves colored in by the kids themselves. On opening day, the sign out front read, Lena's House of Light, the lettering drawn by Jonas, the coloring done by Lena. It was a sunny day, though still brisk with a hint of cold. In the weeks that followed, 3 more children arrived. Nora, a first grader, left by relatives at the hospital door. Sam, a 5-year-old boy who didn't speak to anyone. And then Katie, a 6-year-old girl with tangled hair and lost eyes, brought in by police one rainy afternoon. Lena was the first to greet her. She didn't ask too many questions, just took Katie's hand and led her into the heated room. Are you cold? I have a little flashlight. I'll leave it on at night. I used to be afraid of the dark, too. Katie said nothing, but the fear in her eyes softened. Elliot, standing at the door, saw it all. He looked at Lena, the girl who was once a victim herself, now reaching out to those even more fragile than she had been. He turned to Mrs. Emily and gave a gentle smile. A circle had come full. That first night, Katie stayed. It rained again. In the shared room, Lena laid a small blanket beside Katie's bed. and lay down next to her. The flashlight glowed, a soft yellow light, like a lullaby. "I don't know what happened to you," Lena whispered, "but I know someone will be here to listen whenever you're ready." Katie touched the flashlight. Her eyes blinked, then closed. And in the darkness, her first smile flickered into being. A week later, Elliot was invited to speak at the town's children's rights conference. He stood on the small stage, spotlight catching the grey in his hair, and began, not with a speech, but with a story. "There was once a little girl who said to me, 'I used to wish my dad would look at me the way he used to.' That sentence, that was what made it impossible for me to stay still." The room went silent, and as he closed with the promise, "We will listen to the children who've been forgotten," more than a few people were in tears. On a Sunday afternoon, Lena sat by the second-floor window of the center. Outside, a light rain fell, but inside, the laughter of children echoed through the house. She looked down into the garden, where Jonas was helping Sam plant a sapling. Mrs. Emily was knitting. Elliot was reading fairy tales to two little girls. Lena smiled. The rain didn't feel cold anymore, and the house, once merely a shelter, had become light. A light that never fades. Maybe, in this world, we've all been a child afraid of the dark. The only difference is, some of us were held close and heard a whisper. It's okay. Someone's here with you. Lena's story isn't just about a journey toward justice. It's a reminder that sometimes what changes a life begins with one person brave enough to open their heart. Have you ever stayed silent, even though you wanted to speak? Felt so tired you couldn't reach out, even though your heart was full of love? If so, please don't blame yourself. Because even in the smallest moment, you can still be a light for someone who's lost. If you've made it this far, let me ask you, honestly, are you doing okay today? Have you eaten something delicious? And is your heart feeling warm? Don't forget to care for your hands, and your heart too. They both deserve love.